Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Florence Foster Jenkins, starring Meryl Streep.
Or, as I like to call it, Sharknado 44. We'll explain why I call it Sharknado 44 as we get into the episode.
Rena, can you give us a trigger warning?
Trigger warning. This movie contains depictions of terrible singing, out-of-touch rich people, very long pearl necklaces, Hugh Grant smiling sheepishly, opera, gaslighting, Carnegie Hall, sexually transmitted diseases, cringingly polite smiles, child brides, wigs, bald caps, laughing fits, hangovers, the New York Post, and adultery.
Rena, can you give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
The sources we use in this episode include the book Florence Foster Jenkins, The Inspiring True Story of the World's Worst Singer by Nicholas Martin and Jasper Rees. And I went on the internet. Rena, can you tell us a little bit about Florence Foster Jenkins?
Florence Foster Jenkins was a rich lady who thought she could sing. While there are, to my best knowledge, no corpse capers in this episode, and it has been a long time since we have had a good corpse caper, this will be the first time since Evita that we will be talking about a woman whose husband killed her by giving her a disease with his horrible, disgusting penis. Florence Foster Jenkins was born sometime after the Civil War, and in the movie she says that her husband gave her syphilis on their wedding night when she was 18. In real life, however, she may have been as young as just shy of her 15th birthday, which, to clarify, made her 14. So alas, we also, for the first time in many episodes, get to sing the Child Bride medley. She was only 14.
Only 14.
Only 14. You're 14.
14. You're beautiful.
You're beautiful. And you're mine.
And you're mine.
We were not in unison there.
So romantic, though, being 14 and being married and being given a disease that will stay with you forever.
I am squicked out. So, yes, her husband was middle-aged. He marries this 14-year-old. The marriage was not a success. Evidence of her having syphilis was that her hair fell out, which can be a symptom, and we'll get back to this. So before her adolescence is out, she moves back in with her parents, which is where she should have been the whole time anyway. One of the medical treatments for syphilis in the time before penicillin was mercury, which makes you go crazy, which is where the Mad Hatter comes from, that the Hatters used mercury to treat the felt.
Am I to also assume from that information that the Mad Hatter had syphilis?
The Mad Hatter could have independently had syphilis, but no, the Mad Hatter was using mercury to cure the felts for the hats he was making. So his contact with the mercury made him mad. Someone with syphilis could also go crazy from having syphilis, but their sanity and their well-being could also be affected by the mercury that was used to treat it, and possibly also arsenic was a treatment for syphilis.
I have a question, and I think that we do corner the market here as the only show in the podcast sphere that talks about both biographical films and pre-treatment STDs. Did the mercury and or the arsenic do anything to actually abate the symptoms, or did they just make you go crazy?
I was unable to find any confirmation that mercury did anything to help make syphilis less miserable or less contagious. It was thought that it helped the body sweat things out. People would drool a great deal when they were given mercury to help with syphilis. I went down a rabbit hole, and the most apt answer on the mercury was people thought it helped in some way, and it turns out it didn't. And regarding the arsenic, it may have killed the syphilis bacteria at a certain stage of the disease, but it caused a lot of other problems. My interest was more in Mrs. Jenkins' story than in medical science.
I get it. I know that you weren't planning on tapping into your vast array of medical expertise, so I'm gonna let it all slide.
I've never had any interest in becoming a doctor. And let's just have a moment of collective hate toward this middle-aged man who gave his 14-year-old bride syphilis on their wedding night. So this is from Florence Foster Jenkins, The Inspiring True Story of the World's Worst Singer by Nicholas Martin and Jasper Rees. Many more sufferers were killed by the mercury than the actual ailment it was supposed to cure. Side effects were many, various, and gruesome. They included profuse sweating, corrosion of the membranes of the mouth, gum ulcerations, loosening and eventual loss of the teeth, kidney failure. Florence is not known to have complained of any of the above. But another of the side effects is hair loss. The many photographs of Florence in her pomp seem to display a woman with resplendent hair, or more often with a succession of voluminous hats. In fact, she wore a wig even as quite a young woman. Underneath, her hair thinned until she was completely bald. Another side effect of the mercury poisoning goes even further into the heart of Florence's story. Prolonged exposure to mercury can cause tinnitus. Florence would prove to be a capable musician. While pianists can rely on the instrument to be in tune, singers are at the mercy of their own hearing. St. Clair Bayfield's theory was that in her own head, she sounded in tune. The vast discrepancy between what Florence's audiences heard and what she believed they heard may have been explained by the malign influence of her mercury-induced tinnitus, untuning the music in her ears. One of the indications of the disease's tertiary stage was the sensation of being serenaded by angels. We'll go with that, and I'll apologize for it subsequently.
Well, this just sets the stage for the film that we just watched, which is considered a comedy. This is a great story so far.
So after her failed teenaged marriage to a middle-aged man who had syphilis, she moves back in with her parents, and with varying degrees of discouragement, attempts to become a musical performer. She continues to perform as an amateur. She inherits a bit of money, and in 1909, she met and married Sinclair Bayfield, who is a bit younger than her. They stayed married for 35 years until her death, and she sang for various gatherings of groups that she had given money to or gathered for charitable or music appreciation performances, a highly vetted crowd, as shown here in the movie. She made a recording and eventually had the show at Carnegie Hall, which is recreated in the film Florence Foster Jenkins. And she sold out Carnegie Hall a night after Sinatra. It was crammed. It was pandemonium, as it's shown here. And she died shortly thereafter in 1944, whether from the shock of seeing her reviews or from the syphilis that her husband gave her with his horrible, disgusting penis, finally killing her off. And Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about the movie Florence Foster Jenkins, starring the divine Meryl as Florence Foster Jenkins?
Sure thing. So a little bit of information here from our friends at Wikipedia. This is a biographical film from 2016 directed by Stephen Frears and written by Nicholas Martin and Julia Kogan. As you mentioned, it stars the fabulous Meryl Streep. Hugh Grant is St. Clair Bayfield, and it also features Simon Helberg, Rebecca Ferguson, and Nina Arianda. It filmed in May of 2015, premiered in London in April of 2016, and was released in the US in August of that year. This movie was a hit. It was a $29 million budget, and it made $56 million at the box office. I also think it's important right now to address just this teeny tiny elephant in the room. And about a year ago, Rebecca Ferguson did an interview for Dune 2, The Dunening, in which she mentioned that she worked with an insecure and angry co-star who screamed at her on set. She said, I did a film with an absolute idiot of a co-star, and this human being was so insecure and angry. And I think I was so vulnerable and uncomfortable that I got screamed at, and I would cry walking off set. This person would literally look at me in front of the whole crew and say, you call yourself an actor. This is what I have to work with. And I stood there just breaking because this person was number one on the call sheet. There was no safety net for me. No one had my back. She said that the day after she was screamed at, she stood up for herself and told her co-star, you get off my set. You can F off. I'm going to work toward a tennis ball. And by this, she meant the tennis ball that they hang in front of you on a green screen for you to talk to. And she said, I never want to see you again. The producers told her that she could not do this to the number one on the call sheet, and we have to let this person be on set. There was a lot of speculation when she gave this interview. Who could this be? And people poked around her resume, and they were like, was it Jake Gyllenhaal? Was it Tom Cruise? Was it the little boy Jacob Tremblay from Dr. Sleep? Was it Dwayne The Rock Johnson? Was it Meryl Streep? And what the internet was able to dope out was that it was very highly likely that it was Hugh Grant on the set of this movie. And it tracks with his history of being like a quote, charmingly irascible, which is like a nice way to say he's a mean dick. It gave me a sort of villain cut of this film in my head as I was watching it. And every time he came on screen, just knowing this background, I couldn't stop thinking, this is a bad guy and I don't trust him.
Why is Hugh Grant number one on the call sheet? Shouldn't it be Meryl?
No, he would be number one on the call sheet on the days that they were filming because she did not share any real scenes with Meryl. So he would absolutely be the number one on the call sheet those days.
You're right. The one scene that she's in with Meryl, it's like cutting back and forth.
So it totally tracks that he would be the number one on the days that she was on set.
So we've had our introductory blather. Every so often, Meryl Streep does a movie where she's just having fun, and Florence Foster Jenkins fits into that category next to Mamma Mia.
Yeah, kind of.
She never says, this script isn't as good as the one I had for Sophie's Choice, so I'm only going to give it 85%. That's not her. She gives everything the same very high commitment. And this was her 20th Academy Award nomination.
Any complaint I have about this film, and there are many, her talent is not up for debate, and her commitment to everything that she's in, no matter how good or bad it is, be it She-Devil or Sophie's Choice, she is always showing up 100% for the job.
Truly in this, and they are honest with that the wigs are not great. And there's scenes where they have her in the bald cap, but there's also ones where you realize she has a wig on, but then she has a wig on top of the wig because she's supposed to be performing. And it's possible that she has 3 different things heating up her poor little head. And she's padded out in this, I think, because her figure looks quite dumpy here. And you know that Meryl Streep can still look like sex on a stick when she wants to.
And she does all the time. I would also add here, too, that she did her own singing in this film, and because she is a talented singer, I want to call attention to how impressive it is that she sings this way, because if you can sing well, it is very hard to sing poorly.
I cannot sing well, so it is very easy for me to sing poorly, as I will now demonstrate with the Queen of Night aria, one of the hardest pieces in classical music.
It wasn't professional singer level, but I would say you are not as bad as Florence is.
Sarah, I, like Florence Foster Jenkins, am a tone-deaf ham, except that I know that I'm tone-deaf and have 0 sense of pitch. My range is probably barely an octave and a half. I am not cut out for coloratura. So I only sing if I'm intentionally making fun of how bad I am, and that was pretty bad.
I've heard worse.
I could not cash 4/5 of the checks that I was writing there.
I would say, though, that worth pointing out here, in your defense, opera is very, very difficult to sing. I have countless problems with this movie, and it goes back to a very core issue with this story. As I mentioned, this is a comedy about a lady with syphilis. The performances are all very strong. Costumes are great. Sets are beautiful. Like, everything's working.
So is Hugh Grant a worse person than the man we refer to as Jonathan Depp?
No, because he has not brought a lawsuit intended to re-traumatize and re-abuse his ex-wife. A lawsuit that is capricious and cruel and meaningless and randomly took place in the state of Virginia so he could humiliate her. So since Hugh Grant hasn't done that, he is not worse than Jonathan Depp. I have an issue with what I would categorize as like Lars and the Real Girl-esque movies where everyone co-signs on one person's working through their shit and makes the weird thing that they're doing seem totally okay. You know, it's like it happens in The House of Yes and Benny and June and The Joker. The exception I will give is Shutter Island because it was made by my Lord and Savior and now acting Emmy nominee Martin Scorsese. I just feel like watching this, I'm very uncomfortable with everything about this story because it's not cute. It's profoundly sad. I just found like the tone of this, like this lighthearted, like, look, this lady has syphilis and she can't sing, kind of screwed up. Who is this for? It's not inspiring.
So I thought this was a gentle movie, and I think that my tolerance for things that are twee is much higher than yours since I'm a costume drama person and you are a gritty auteur theory person. And also, I love the suits and the dinner jackets.
Yes, it's a very nice looking movie. I also thought that it was too long, and I have some theories about its lack of focus and ways that it could have been a tighter movie. But this is a movie about elder abuse dressed up like fun madcap comedy. It's a woman who's 50 years into a diagnosis of syphilis, thinking she can sing, and everyone around her being like, let's make it seem as if she can because she's not hurting anyone. I don't like it.
This is a woman who was handed a pretty bad set of cards, and yes, being wealthy, I think, can do a great deal to mitigate that. But she finds a much younger man who puts everything into setting up a fantasy world for her where she's a great singer. Her money is used to compel people around her. She's certainly a kind person. She loves music. Maybe at the very beginning of this whole charade, some doctor could have explained to her, you're hearing things and whatever is going on with your treatment is affecting your hearing. Because she can hear when other people are good at singing, but does she not hear playback on her own recording? I don't even know if medicine was at the status where someone could have explained that to her.
It's not fun for me. And we open in 1944 on, as I mentioned, one of modern cinema's greatest monsters, Hugh Grant, reciting Hamlet content for an audience. And then we see Florence Foster Jenkins being dropped down on the stage, tied up, and dressed like an angel, of course.
Hugh Grant is playing Florence Foster Jenkins' husband of 35 years, St. Clair Bayfield. And he is declaiming quite badly. He is played here as an overdramatic, somewhat hammy and enthusiastic performer of Shakespeare. There's a scene where he offers to recite John Keats to Florence as she's falling asleep, and she says, no, she's not into it, which makes me wonder if she thinks of his acting the way that everyone thinks of her singing, and she's just being nice to him about it. In real life, St. Clair Bayfield may have been reasonably talented, but he seems to have played a lot of minor, lower supporting level or high cameo to low supporting level roles in respectable productions. He strikes me as embodying professionally that thing that Prufrock says about I am no Lord Hamlet, but one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, except that that is what he did on stage.
Another bummer. I think at this point, too, you and I both came to the table with Sharknado references.
I've said that I relate to her, but I'm aware of just how bad my singing is and not to deploy it, except to make people laugh at how terrible it is. And she thinks she's good. My thesis on Florence Foster Jenkins as Sharknado 1944 is not that the movie is like Sharknado. It's that Florence Foster Jenkins herself was the Sharknado of 1944 as this cultural phenomena that's so bad it's funny.
The thing is, all of those movies for the Sci-Fi Network are at least somewhat self-aware. The thing with Sharknado is like the ridiculousness of the conceit of that film made it go above and beyond the typical fare that airs on that network. But like this one, like for whatever reason, like captured the imaginations of the world. And you had things like Mia Farrow and Philip Roth putting up pictures on Instagram of them watching it together. It superseded even the limited camp value that those films generally had because it was just such an insane concept.
Florence Foster Jenkins as a person, it's as analogous as you can get for a time that didn't have the internet, a time when you couldn't insta-generate a meme. There is no real meme culture. She is personally Sharknado.
The huge bummer, though, about that is she's not self-aware. That makes it sort of awful that she's not aware, like she's not aware of that she's the joke.
Well, how in on the joke was Sharknado? Did the producers think it was going to get as big as it did?
I don't think so. I think like they knew what they were doing in a really like limited way. There's a whole bunch of people who made that movie because they needed to keep their actors' equity or SAG health insurance. Like Ian Ziering of 90210 fame admitted as much that is why he took the job. So they know they weren't making Emmy-winning television. I don't think what I don't think they expected was for the level of delight that it was received with.
I can see what you're saying, but if you look back at that era, very few people at the time, from what I can gather looking at the cultural artifacts, were tuned into irony as a cultural thing in a way that aligns with what we do now. Members of the Algonquin Round Table and perhaps cabaret singers fleeing Berlin might have understood irony or self-awareness as we understand them now. The exceptions around her lack of the self-awareness that Sharknado has simply weren't something that can be retroactively recreated for 1944. Could not create a Florence Foster Jenkins today because there is the internet. St. Clair Bayfield spent decades vetting everyone who wrote about her, everyone who came to her little happenings, and you see where he could buy all of the copies of a paper within a 2-block radius of everywhere she was going to be.
This is a softer side of the coddling of a person who's too old for what they're doing and doesn't know which end is up. But, you know, it's the year of our Lord 2025, and we have an entire U.S. government built around coddling an untalented nitwit who's working out daddy issues. And I'm tired of this sentiment existing anywhere that I go. So there's that. It is great that she supports the arts, though.
Which elder abuse is really going on here? Because the apartment where St. Clair lives separately from her, since she doesn't want to give him syphilis, is rather modest. He doesn't run through all her money. She doesn't seem to be running out of money anytime soon. I don't think his custodianship is that abusive, except in protecting her from the truth. But if you want to know who is this movie for, I have an answer. My mother. She thinks she saw it, but she doesn't remember anything about it.
Not unlike your mother, I will have completely forgotten I watched this movie in a very short period of time. As soon as the episode comes out, I'm going to be like, did I actually watch that? I won't remember anything that happened in it. I think we can try and blaze through this plot pretty quickly. Simon Helberg shows up to audition to be her accompanist.
We don't hear her sing in this scene, but I was wondering, are they going to go into this on some things from reading the book? And they do show that her hair is fallen out and she's wearing this very wiggy looking brown wig. And yes, she and the man played by Hugh Grant actually were married.
I did get all confused by this because I wasn't sure which woman he was married to. Rebecca Ferguson is his girlfriend on the side because his life is very complicated, as he explains.
So Florence always carries a very beaten up brown leather briefcase with her, which we find out contains her will much later in the film, but she's never seen without this briefcase, and she's auditioning accompanists. This is not a first welcome to the show for Simon Helberg. He was previously in Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, as Dreidel L'chaim.
Here we have a very brief sighting of future star Josh O'Connor, who would be on The Crown and Challengers.
I was wondering, who is Josh O'Connor playing? I think a lot of the comic cameos come and go in this. We see our first on-screen Cole Porter, who will subsequently be played by Kevin Kline in DeLovely. There was also a Cole Porter biopic made sometime at mid-century in which he is portrayed as a heterosexual man, because we did things like that back then. There's this huge line of people who want the gig with the rich lady, and she likes that Cosme McMoon, the man played by Simon Helberg, has a light touch on the keys. So she does have some amount of taste. She doesn't want someone who hammers the keys.
She does. And this is also where we find out she cannot sing. We go to her first rehearsal and Simon Helberg is there and he's playing along and he's straight up like stricken by the experience of hearing her sing.
So as someone who is not tone deaf, how would you describe her singing?
It's atrocious. The notes that she is able to reach are wrong. It defies science how bad her voice is. It's screechy, it's pitchy, it sounds kind of like a bird. It is incredible. It literally strains credulity that someone can sing this badly. Your mocking singing is better than hers because her sincerity makes it even more horrible.
So, in real life, Cosme McMoon had been her accompanist since around the mid-1920s, but all of this is supposed to take place in roughly a few months from what I can tell. It's leading up to this performance that she gives on October 24th of 1944, 81 years before the release of Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere. So in terms of seeing Simon Helberg here, he is primarily known for the TV show The Big Bang Theory, and I have a very intense loathing for The Big Bang Theory, so I was happy to see him playing a character who's completely different. I dislike all Chuck Lorre productions. I also hated Family Matters, the Urkel show. I hate the unappealing way that really smart people are shown in these contexts. What I hate about it as well is it makes me remember all of my horrible nights in high school, sitting alone watching the TGIF lineup and hating Urkel and glowering at the TV and thinking, stereotypes like this are why I'm not getting laid until college. So I fucking hate The Big Bang Theory a lot.
But you're okay now.
It's been 30 years. I'm just stuck being me at this point.
I'm aligned in a general way with you here in that it was very mystifying to me that everyone was delighted by it. But I also hate this movie, so what do I know?
What I find myself thinking about, and I know we're going on about The Big Bang Theory, and that is not the Simon Helberg feature that is in this episode. I'm just talking about my reactions to him. But what I always find myself thinking when I see nerd stereotypes like that is, how much better off would we and our progeny be if people with this kind of brain were shown as being sexy as hell?
I agree with you on that, because I think part of the reason that we're in our current conundrum is this constant idea that nerds and smart people deserve to be derided, and that our intelligence is something that we should mock rather than treasure.
Back to the movie we're actually the thing we're actually watching, which also happens to feature Simon Helberg.
I don't want to talk about the movie, so it's fine. So Hugh Grant is telling Simon Helberg, who's like, she's not good. And he's like, no, she's amazing. I will not say otherwise. Her voice coach is the same. He says, you just need to practice on this one thing. And as someone who's worked as a communications professional and has had to deal with people who are talented, but maybe aren't necessarily talented at the thing that I'm working with them on in that moment, I have been in the position where I've had to have these conversations with people where you're giving very carefully calibrated commentary because you want to avoid being sent to the cornfield by that mean little boy in the Twilight Zone episode, which is what would happen if you say the wrong thing. And that's a very specific reference. Basically, just to say, I feel his pain here, but he is all in, and Simon Helberg gets in the elevator and he just bursts out laughing.
Cosme McMoon does not want to go on, and he says, I'm not going to play on stage with this woman. And Hugh Grant keeps paying him off until eventually we get to Carnegie Hall. Florence Foster Jenkins' vocal coach is the assistant conductor for the Metropolitan Opera. And I wonder, is it that she's paying him, or that somewhere in him he appreciates the amount of love that she has for music, which is what I want to run with because I'm sentimental.
I don't know how I feel about that. My vocal coach, for example, was always happy to tell me if something sucked, if I needed to work harder, if there was something I wasn't doing that I needed to do. But we're all going to just pretend that Florence can sing until she dies. Then we have a party and we meet Nina Arianda, who's playing a brassy broad who's married to one of their rich friends.
She's playing a trophy wife with an outer borough accent. She looks amazing in this. Nina Arianda has one of the best mouths in show business. She always looks like she's hiding a smirk, even when she's deadly serious. There's something just about the shape of her and the way she moves is like a whip. She's a physical actor who justifiably demands space, and she's perfect here.
I feel like consistently anything she's in, you notice her right away. Also, apparently Toscanini is at this party, and then we go into a bathroom, and I almost had to take a moment to go vomit because mayonnaise-based salads make me feel incredibly unsafe and sick, and the bathtub is filled with potato salad.
This is from real life. Florence Foster Jenkins always had to have a bathtub full of potato salad for her parties.
Like, it's so gross. I'm going to throw up.
Does this make you feel unsafe the way that the artistry of Spike Lee makes you feel unsafe? Or is potato salad a different kind of unsafe?
It's not the good kind of unsafe, but both could end with me vomiting. For example, I almost had to leave the theater after the opening credits of Clockers. And I also almost had to leave the room when I saw this potato salad. You could see and hear like the Foley work on this potato salad. Mayonnaise-based salads are just, God.
Sarah, is there a safe word for potato salad?
Like, are you talking about like a word that would make me stop thinking about it?
I'm not sure that such a word exists.
It's like, just put some macaroni salad in there next to it. See what happens. Like, what the hell is wrong with people? Why mayonnaise on everything? Can you tell I don't want to talk about this movie because I hated it?
Yeah, macaroni salad is gross. You're right. Yeah. Because you're talking about mayonnaise, which you also hate. So Hugh Grant is at home with his mistress, Kathleen, played by Rebecca Ferguson.
Yep.
At this concert where we have met Nina Arianda's character, Agnes Stark, most of the audience is nonplussed, or they're keeping this polite face, and there are these little old ladies who wear actual tiaras, and they're wearing these tiaras irony-free, who are always complimenting Florence. But Nina's double take is so brilliant. She should just do a double take at Robert Wool so that he dies of shame for having ever thought he could do a double take. But she starts laughing and has to be escorted out. She's crawling and rolling around on the floor with laughter. And it's contagious because other people are starting to struggle to not laugh. Then there's a party back at St. Clair's house where Cosme McMoon comes, and it's this whole other bohemian set, and Hugh Grant does this wild little dance, and Nina Arianda shows up, and at some point in this movie, I don't understand where or how she becomes Florence's biggest fan, and I don't understand what makes the switch to that, and we'll talk about that a bit more later.
It's all fun and everybody's drunk and having a good time. And the next morning, Florence shows up at St. Clair's and he has to hide the girlfriend because Florence thinks that they are married, which they are married, but she doesn't think that he is catting around on her with a girlfriend.
St. Clair makes an executive decision to blame the mess in the apartment and the clear signs of prior copious drinking to Cosme. On Cosme, there is a very funny moment of Simon Helberg and Hugh Grant conspiring to conceal a very hungover Nina Arianda. Prior to this, Florence's doctor comes by and tells her that she needs bed rest. She has issues from syphilis, which she's mentioned how she contracted it on her wedding night, and what the medications she takes for it are, which includes arsenic, of course. This doctor mentioned at one point, I've seen people live 20 years with syphilis. I've never seen anyone live 50 years with it. And St. Clair says that music keeps her alive. He has said that he and Florence have an arrangement and that love takes many forms, but he has to shove Kathleen into the closet when Florence comes over.
And because it's Hugh Grant, it feels mean because I can't get a good beat on his intentions in this relationship. But by the end of it, you realize that he's doing all this stuff and trying to like build this whole world for her because he loves her. And that's at least how it's played in the movie.
My take was he's building a world for her, and he has a form of love for her that isn't physical passion, but is some kind of soulmate type love with a romanticism to it, because you do see where he recites poetry for her, he curls up on the bed next to her, and she was only about a decade or so older than him when they met. She would have been in her early 40s, and at one point she says, I could have given you a child, and she says a child, not plural children, because like her clock was getting pretty close to time for the 1940s, even without the syphilis. But it's possible she could have given him a child if she hadn't had syphilis, and she does allude to that. I think what's up with Florence is that her madness keeps her sane.
I guess so.
Hugh Grant has an order to fulfill in this film, which is to be the Hugh Grantiest Hugh Grant that ever Hugh granted, and he fulfills it. He Hugh Grants. But I think that someone who could do things besides the Hugh Grant thing could sell this character lovingly building a world better than he can, especially when he shoves his girlfriend into the closet. It's inconsistent. It's not a good enough film to sell it that way. They shook all of the pieces in the magic filmmaking cocktail shaker, and it just didn't come out well. Sometimes it does, but there's some chemical thing that happens in putting it together with a film that just doesn't come together here. Even when you make good decisions in assembling the pieces.
I would have rather seen, a Matthew McFadden or, Colin Firth or someone who plays, some sincerity in this role.
McFadden's probably too young for it, and he definitely was in 2016, but I can see, like, Matthew McFadden could make the role convincing.
Yeah, just someone who doesn't seem contemptuous of everyone around him. And this is maybe a Sarah problem, or maybe it's this movie's problem, but this screenplay feels like it was written to be one thing, which could have been from Cosmo's point of view. and about his experience. But then it's like they maybe locked in a couple of stars and it became more like the movie that it is, which doesn't have a focal point of who's telling the story and who's seeing it. And because of that, I felt like it never came together. And also that it was just too long.
It was only about 2 hours and change.
Yeah, but I felt every fucking minute of that. And it all just led up to this one performance. And then she died. And it was like, wait, what did we do all this for? You could have done this and made it all, for example, from Cosmo's point of view and made it about how he comes to accept that making great art is doing something with great joy. And as we learned from Robbie Williams, that it is an honor to have the opportunity to perform. And rather than trying to create a flawless finished project, music is supposed to inspire, bring people joy, or like go on that journey and that bullshit. I love Rebecca Ferguson. Do not get me wrong, but you could have cut her character entirely from this movie. The whole drama of Hugh Grant and her relationship served nothing in terms of Florence and who is that for? Because you could have had a tighter movie. You just picked a direction of where the story was coming from and then like focused that.
So are you saying that Hugh Grant was right about the quality of Rebecca Ferguson's acting?
No. Rebecca Ferguson is brilliant. I just feel like, what was the purpose of that character? Why did I need to go on that journey with him through that? Like, what did we get out of that? You could have shown all of this through Simon Helberg's viewpoint, where he's seeing this relationship and he's understanding that it's unconventional and he's learning, because there is this great scene right after this where Florence goes to Cosmo's apartment, and he's playing the piano and they're playing together and she starts washing his dishes and talking to him, and you see who she is and where her head goes. Also at this point, they make a recording and she's on the radio.
She's terrible. She does it in one take. They ask her, do you want to do that again? And she says, no, it's perfect. And it somehow gets on the radio because St. Clair has to take Kathleen for a golf weekend because she's mad at him for shoving her in a closet. He could have shoved her under the bed. It isn't quite clear where he shoves her while she's wrapped up in a sheet. So he takes her on this golf weekend where they can go be a cute, normal couple for a weekend. And Florence goes and makes this record of her singing. She sings words that she made up to Cosme's composition. They're half in French. She's made it into a love song, and the lyrics that are half in French are about some dalliance that she's having, but they're quite bad in French too, just knowing how the translation would fit. But this is put out on the radio, and now the people who are going to hear this ironically or think it's a joke and that the singer is in on it are hearing it, and they love it because it's 1944 and life is hard.
Yeah, we were really short on the lulls in 1944.
It's the autumn after D-Day. We're winning, but it isn't settled yet when or how we're finally done with the Nazis and can go finish dealing with the Japanese too, and then go home and wear gray flannel suits and buy houses in suburban subdivisions and numb our pain with cocktails.
It's still bad and sounds like it's going to get a ton better, though.
Well, compared to being actively in a war, that lifestyle sounds really good.
That's fair.
In terms of Florence's singing again, we have this from the real life Cosme McMoon. And this is coming again from Nicholas Martin's book. Very early, she demonstrated this desire to sing, he explained, and her parents objected to the excruciating quality in her voice. And in her early teens, she ran away from home and went to Philadelphia to try and make her way. She suffered great hardships and privations until her father, hearing of it, came to town and took her back home. She was restored to her social position, but with the proviso that she wouldn't sing anymore. But just as another note on, as we're building up to that Carnegie Hall show, in terms of like what do people need distraction from? The same day that the reviews from Florence Foster Jenkins's Carnegie Hall show, here's some of the things that were in the paper, again from that biography. U.S. defeats Japanese Navy, ran the headline across the front of the New York Times. All foes' ships in one fleet hit. Many sunk. Battle continues. At the bottom right-hand corner of page 19 was a 6-line item titled Florence F. Jenkins in Recital.
Her song's on the radio and people are calling in and requesting it because it's so terrible and crazy. And there's one soldier who calls in and he's like, I got my face blown off at Guadalcanal and this is the first time I feel like, thank God I'm not that lady. And look, we invented Schadenfreude here in America. It's going to be great.
I think it's his leg that's blown off. And he says that everyone he knows loves this record, but it gets on the radio and people think it's funny. And Hugh Grant and Rebecca Ferguson go to a bar that looks a lot like Chumley's. This bar in the Village, it was a speakeasy in the 1920s. It's in like a courtyard and it's really weird to find, but it has a very special ambiance. He hears them get this record out and she says, I'm going to leave you if you interfere with these soldiers who are making fun of your wife's record. This is our evening out together. And he says, no, I'm going to interfere with them on behalf of my wife, who is not you. That isn't what he says. That's how I'm remembering it. And he goes and tries to get the record and they beat him up for being an effete British guy. And he sees Rebecca Ferguson getting into a cab. I don't really care about this relationship breaking up. I'll give you that. And then he has to talk Simon Helberg into going on stage at Carnegie Hall. And Helberg is like, but I have ambition. And Hugh Grant offers up an ode to mediocrity and why mediocrity can be noble. And then Florence has the Carnegie Hall show. And I thought, are we going to see them recreate the whole thing? But it's only 2 numbers, including her rendition of the Queen of Night aria. And I actually could have done with more of this. I would have liked to have seen a montage of the costume changes and what other songs did she try to handle and what were some of the highlights of like, what thing is she butchering now, or more of people reacting to things because it is kind of contagious. And these soldiers that they'd given tickets to, because part of the purpose of her having this show was to raise money for the troops, they're laughing at her and it starts to break the illusion. So Nina Arianda, who's just been flashing her gorgeous, gorgeous body because she is a performer who is very physically confident, she yells at him and she tells him, this woman is singing her heart out. I can see that it's in that character's spirit that she's a brassy dame, but she's not mean. But I don't quite see what flips her on Florence, or if it's just the spirit of the social scene around Florence at the party the previous time that they all hung out. I don't see her transition. Maybe it's from having fun with the people around Florence, but I don't make the connection as to how she becomes Florence's big defender. Anyway, she gets them all applauding, and I appreciate where she's coming from. I don't understand the how of it. I think she sells it. I'm not blaming Nina Arianda here. I'm blaming her script, to be clear.
It is a swap that comes out of nowhere, and I wonder if there was a scene somewhere that's sitting on a cutting room floor where she and Florence have a moment of, you and I are not so different. And I would have loved to have seen that scene.
Nina Arianda opposite Meryl Streep as these characters having a moment of like mutual recognition. Would have loved to have seen that. I would have rather had that than one more scene of Hugh Grant grinning sheepishly.
Not to over-rotate on this, but for a movie that is about Florence Foster Jenkins, we're hanging out with a lot of dudes who are not Florence Foster Jenkins. The movie shortchanges her a bit. And of course, like Meryl Streep it's fine. She makes it all happen. You can see everything going on in her face. She is a star.
Meanwhile, the possible villain of the film, which there really are no bad guys in this movie, except for possibly this New York Post writer, who is going to write a truthful review about the quality of Florence's singing. And it is going to be a mean-spirited, truthful review. Although I doubt there is anyone in all of publicity or management who could hide the nudity of the emperor now. the amount of protection that St. Clair creates around her is not impregnable. And the fact that it took this long for someone to say the emperor has no clothes is incredible. He has done a thorough job shielding her.
Yeah, like you gotta essentially be like a necromancer or Rasputin or Kris Jenner to keep this alive forever. It's impossible.
He offers the New York Post reporter $100, $200, $300, $500 to not write this thing because every review that has been put out has been heavily policed. The writers writing about Florence have always been in the pocket, or it's been through an organization that she patronized. This writer does have integrity for saying, I'm going to pull up the curtain. But we are in the little magical world where everyone is emotionally invested in feeding Mrs. Jenkins the illusion that she's a good singer. But all that this Post writer is doing is telling the truth. And this seems like a version of the New York Post with a good bit more integrity than the one that's been around our whole lives, which is
it's a tabloid.
Yeah, it's a tabloid. It has some very funny headlines. My favorite New York Post headline of all time was from about 2003 or so, where it was some incident where the president of France had kissed First Lady Laura Bush's hand. So the front page of the New York Post said, Laura braves weasel kiss. And it had that shot of him bending down to kiss her hand where they had photoshopped the head of a weasel onto the Frenchman. And I think there might have been another Frenchman next to him, and that they both had weasel heads.
Gosh, that's amazing. I had a favorite and I can't remember it anymore, so I have nothing to contribute here, but that's a good one.
This New York Post writer is going to break the magic by telling the truth. And they go home, and St. Clair does stay the night with her. He curls up next to her on top of the sheets. And then the next morning he goes out, he buys all of the papers. He and Cosmo McMoon buy every copy of the New York Post that she is in risk of encountering within a radius of the blocks that she's going to be moving through. And he puts all of the copies of the New York Post from her local newsstand into the trash can.
Something you just said reminded me what my favorite headline was. And it was when there was going to be a Klan march in New York City. And the headline was, Sheet Happens.
Ooh.
Yeah. Okay.
Ooh.
Sorry about that.
Oh, keeping it classy, New York Post.
Oh, that was my favorite.
So the jig is coming to its end. Florence goes out to lunch with everyone, and lo and behold, someone near her table is reading the New York Post. So Cosme and St. Clair do a whole dance to keep it out of her sight line. She runs into some soldiers who tell her how funny she is, and she's being a perfect lady, but she's rather mystified that that's their reaction. She doesn't understand. And then finally, you see she's outside, and she finds her own newsstand where they describe Hugh Grant's character as the man who bought all the copies of the newspaper, and in particular, that whole stack of New York Posts for the day. And you see her reading the article and kind of swaying there from a distance. But I would have liked to have seen Meryl's face here. It's like physical acting. You see her like swaying where she stands, and the paper is blowing back into her face.
And she collapses and is on the verge of death, and it's very sad. And she asks Hugh Grant, were they laughing at me? And I don't remember what he said back, but it's something about, you were never a joke.
I can buy that everyone operating climate controls around her was doing it in a spirit of love. And I can also buy that they do that because they're moved in some way by how passionate she is about music.
And she wanted to do, and like, as you mentioned, like, it's a show for the troops. She wanted to do that out of kindness to bring them joy. And she did. Like St. Clair, for example, like, money can't buy that level of loyalty.
No, it can't. When she's in this deathbed sequence, there's this one moment where it shows you her concert and you hear what Florence hears in her head. You almost feel like Sinclair hears it with her too. or that's what the nature of his feelings are. And then she says to him, and this is something she really said, and I love this line because it has so much brio to it, and this will be my thing for choice dialogue. People did say, I cannot sing, but no one can say, I did not sing.
Yeah, it's a lovely performance from Meryl, and that's our movie, and then she's dead. We find out in the epilogue, the recording of her at Carnegie Hall is one of the most checked out recordings from Carnegie Hall's archives. We find out that St. Clair lived modestly for the rest of his life, and he did all he could for the arts. Cosme never played Carnegie Hall again, but he did get into bodybuilding.
And St. Clair and Kathleen eventually married.
Wow.
You get the sense that she's just gone here, but I don't care about this couple.
I don't either. I couldn't be troubled. I can't get past the fact that I feel like at the core of this is a mean spirit.
I don't believe that the truth would have set Madame Florence free. I don't believe that the truth would have made her happy.
No, but it's a question for someone else to deal with because I don't actually care enough. But there's also the threat of the cruelty, the threat of this laddering up to her becoming a spectacle. When's the point where you can't control it anymore, whether that's with that New York Post reporter or someone else?
St. Clair, I don't believe he would have let her make that recording had he not gone to play golf for a weekend with the woman he was actually sleeping with in order to maintain the relationship after humiliating her by making her hide when his syphilitic wife, who he couldn't sleep with, showed up. If he had been in town that weekend, that recording getting out never would have happened.
That is true.
His whole life went into policing every aspect around her, and the one time that he goes and has a little weekend to keep his own sphere together, it leads to the concert at Carnegie Hall, which did bring joy to many, many people.
Yeah, it's one of those real, like, be careful and be specific about what you put out into the universe.
My choice dialogue for the week is that famous statement of Florence Foster Jenkins's, and I don't know if it was something she said on her deathbed. In fact, people did say that I cannot sing, but nobody can say that I did not sing. Did you have any choice dialogue, Sarah?
No.
You have an award to give to Josh O'Connor, and then we have actual awards talk.
Yes. So inspired by, and I want to be clear, this is not me being a dick because, I ended up after we talked about Cormac Fingerett and his bit part in Springsteen Deliver Me from Nowhere. I happened to look up that actor whose role I had alluded to, and he seems to be a very super talented young man who went to Tisch and probably has a big future. So in honor of the future I believe in for him, I have created an award called the Cormac Fingerett as Man Riding in Truck with Man Yelling Bruce You Suck Award for promising featured extra or extras performance that I found particularly memorable. So someone else who, as an example, would have received that award is the girl screaming Judas in A Complete Unknown. This week, I am giving that award to Josh O'Connor, who, as I mentioned, pops up for a quick sec in this movie and then went out there and became the star of Challengers and played Prince Charles. And I think is on his way and really stood out in the brief moment he is in this film, at least for me. And then for other awards talk, at the 89th Academy Awards, that would be the awards honoring 2016. This movie was nominated for Best Actress for Meryl Streep. And as you said, it was her 20th nomination. And also for Best Costume Design. Film also received 4 nominations at the Golden Globes, including Best Motion Picture Musical or Comedy, and also Best Actress Musical or Comedy, to give you a sense of who she was up against that year. This was the year of Emma Stone winning everything for La La Land. Also, Isabelle Huppert, who should have won for Elle, Ruth Negga for Loving, and Natalie Portman for Jackie. So this was it's an honor to be nominated year because Emma Stone was not given that up.
Ruth Negga in Loving, that was so good.
There were some really lovely performances that year, and also Huppert is so overdue. Nevertheless, it was an honor to be nominated for the 20th time for Meryl. She is fine. do not worry about Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep has the best Academy Awards nomination batting average per body of work for getting personally nominated. And now, let's score this thing. Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher on how we score movies?
Of course. We rate our movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films. But the list is specially tailored to the issues specific to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing. And Rena, would you mind going first?
Not at all. So for outward appearances, makeup and hair, I gave it a 9. For acting and casting, I gave it a 7. It was all clear that this was happening over a portion of 1944. For costuming, I gave it a 7.5. For quality of the script, I gave it a 4. For accuracy, 5. For storytelling, 5. Production value, 7. For production, direction, decision-making, I gave it a 5. And for do we care, I gave it a 2. Because despite all of the nice things I had to say, I think that was just because of how our good cop, bad cop shook out in this particular episode. And there's something on a chemistry level that just didn't fall together here. So my average comes to a 6.1. I'm not using the by either way because I did enjoy Florence Foster Jenkins in a detached sort of way.
I think I've made it clear that this movie sat very poorly with me and that I feel like you could recut this with sinister music and make it a horror movie. So outward appearances, makeup and hair, I gave it a 9. Acting and casting, I gave it a 9. Passage of time, 6. Costuming, 7. Quality of the script, 4. Accuracy, 5. Storytelling, 3. Production value, 7. Production, direction, decision making, 6. Do we care, 3. My score averages out to a 5.9. So Florence Foster Jenkins, you're perfectly adequate. Even though, as I said, I did not care for this movie.
Florence Foster Jenkins, your total came to a 6. You are a perfectly adequate use of an evening for people like my parents.
Yep.
Other stuff that you should watch instead. I would like to guide you towards John Waters, who really does get camp. And he did an NPR All Songs Considered episode about 10 or 15 years ago that I highly recommend, where he had pulled this collection of songs together and he talks about it, and it's this mad bunch of songs where some of them are actually these amazing undiscovered gems, and some of them are just insane. And you have to dig deep to figure out where the heck they're coming from. One of them is by one of his leading ladies, Edith Massey, and it's terrible. And he says something that was similar to Mrs. Jenkins's statements about her singing. And it's a thing that has stayed with me all these years, where John Waters said, people may say that it's the worst album ever made, but I say it's Edith Massey's best album. So I would say to track down that episode and also to listen to some of the songs that he does snippets from on that. There's one on there that I actually loved that is now in my top 200 songs rotation, called I Don't Care Anymore by Doris Duke, which is also the name of a very rich lady with a sad life. But the singer's name was also Doris Duke, and she sings this song called I Don't Care Anymore about a woman who's had an incredibly sad life, and I'm not going to sing it. The chorus is gleefully bleak, and I want to sing it, but I shouldn't because that'll make you not go listen to it. It's so good. Just to go look up I Don't Care Anymore by Doris Duke.
I talked a lot about Lars and the Real Girl, which I won't recommend, but I will recommend Shutter Island, the only movie I can tolerate where people build a world around someone's crazy. And I'm just going to remind everyone, it's summer. Be real careful about eating potato salad.
What about chicken salad? I don't mind a traditional chicken salad sometimes. It's actually going to be even worse for you, likely, in the heat than potato. I'm sorry.
I can't even do tuna salad anymore. It's the mayo. like the white food. Anyway, sorry.
In closing, we'd just like to remind our listeners, please don't marry a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old or anyone under 14 or under 18. The age of consent exists for a reason, and actually stick to 21. And please, if you think that you may have syphilis, there's penicillin now.
Mm-hmm. Get it while you can, everybody.
Don't go looking for arsenic or breaking thermometers open so you can drink the mercury in the event that you think that you may have syphilis. Use penicillin. Although, we all know that you can get rid of syphilis by drinking bleach. Everyone knows it.
It's true.
So, retractions, apologies, and listener mailbag. On the trailer preview episode for Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere, I talked about Chris Christie's popularity rating upon leaving office, where I said it's somewhere between 9 and 19, and you said in the mid-teens. So I was going to look up exactly what it was, and I realized, saying between 9 and 19 as an average is probably perfectly okay. We get it. Dude had a low popularity rating.
Yeah, he was a very unpopular governor by the end of it. I just looked it up. 15%, 81% disapproval rating. I don't know that we've all agreed on something as a society more than that.
It's vanishingly hard to remember anything in the past 30 years or so where people have agreed that thoroughly across party lines. Sarah, I have a correction regarding something in what is technically our next episode, Alexander, which got flipped with this, but I will eventually flip the two of these in the release order because I can change the past regardless of what everyone tries to tell me about changing the present. This correction is coming from a 70-something Jewish woman in Pennsylvania who wanted me to let you know that you do not know how to pronounce mishugas, the Yiddish word for crazy. In that episode, you pronounced mishugas as mishgas. There are 3 syllables, not 2. It will be quite a while before we allow you to operate the space laser.
I'm sorry to hear this. I think you know that I have spent many years being Jewish identifying and aspiring towards that life. I understand about not letting me operate the space laser, though. I get it.
Just, you have to learn to make the chet, and meshugas has 3 syllables.
I go real light on that 3rd syllable, but I'm not saying it right.
So with that, can you take us out?
Sure. So just a couple of outro items here. Our podcast baby has matured into a cantankerous toddler, and we've launched a Patreon simply to defray some of the costs associated with bringing our show to you, which includes platform hosting, recording, and research. We occasionally order a book off the internet in the lead up to recording an episode. And just as a reminder, to be clear, Rena is the only one who reads. And we also sometimes have to pay for movie rentals. So we are offering at this time shout outs and access to our awful first 3 episodes to anyone who chips in for now. But more good things will be coming. And with that, we'd love to thank Gates, who already signed up and is the best.
Yeah, thanks, Gates. So
if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @Biopic a Podcast Story, so do check us out there, and we'll link to that in our show notes as well. Please check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. And if you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in to our next episode, where we'll be talking about Alexander, directed by Oliver Stone. Although, if you're listening to this in the release week, the next episode to come out chronologically will be about the rise of Catherine the Great from 1934. This will be our first trip back to the 1930s since Private Life of Henry VIII. This actually came out 1 year after that.
I can't wait.
So, good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Good night.
Good night, Sarah.
Good night, Rena.